Hello everyone, or Kaya as we say in our Noongar language. I am Carol Pettersen, an elder from our Noongar nation. Thank you for your welcome, and I bring you greetings from my people in Menang country in Albany, Western Australia. We are known as the Noongar peoples of the indigenous race of Australia and have lived here for more than 47,000 years. We Noongar people have a profound physical and spiritual connection to country. It relates to our belief and customs regarding creation, life, death, and spirits of the earth. Spiritual connection to country guides the way we understand, navigate, and use the land. For instance, this plant, the talyarak, tells us that we're in our own country. It defines our territorial boundaries. Noongar law and customs guide the way in which we define our country and our rights to it. Law also influences how we connect with and care for the land. As Noongar people, we have a duty to speak for our country, to acknowledge its values to our communities, and to observe this law. So, were traditional ecological practices consistent with contemporary science, determined biodiversity conservation needs of the South Australia? I'll let Alison take us through that question.
Hi, my name's Alison Lullfitz and I'm a conservation biologist born and raised here in the Noongar country of southwestern Australia. Here are some other key people who've been involved in our research, including most of our co-authors. So looking at previously recorded Noongar ecological knowledge led the biologists among us to wonder about an alignment between Noongar lifeways and Octal Theory, a theory based on Western science evidence that best explains the biodiversity conservation needs of southwestern Australia. So what is Octal Theory? This is a theory that differentiates between the biota of old and young landscapes, or in other words, old, climatically buffered, infertile landscapes, or ocbils, such as granites or laterites, or this quartzite upland you can see in this top photo, or young, often disturbed, fertile landscapes, such as coastal dunes, wetlands, or river valleys, such as the Palinut River here in the bottom photo. So globally, old landscapes are rare. They occur in areas away from tectonic plate margins with a long history, free of sea level rise and glaciation, and this rules out most of the northern hemisphere. Old landscapes support higher plant diversity and endemism than young landscapes, but most botanical research and corresponding conservation practices are focused in young and are not necessarily well suited to the rich flora of old landscapes. So how should we manage old and young landscapes differently? Weathered, stable old landforms support high proportions of ancient lineage flora. They're more likely to support small populations of long-lived plant taxa that's highly evolved to suit specific infertile soil conditions and have poor dispersal capability. In other words, old landscapes are specialist flora dominated. To conserve their flora, the best approach is really to leave them alone. Their naturally high fragmentation and specificity to soil type means that clearing or frequent disturbance of even the smallest of areas could easily remove a plant community or even an entire taxa. More fertile and naturally disturbed young landforms, however, generally support recently evolved, common and widespread generalist plant taxa, with wide dispersal mechanisms to maximise distribution and to colonise disturbed areas. Periodic disturbance of young landforms is generally okay and is often required for renewal of many plants, and therefore ongoing human disturbance can be helpful. So in southwestern Australia, our landscapes and plants are old, and I mean really very old. So to put this in perspective, across most of the northern hemisphere, soils are about 12,000 years old, approximating to the last glacial maximum. In southwestern Australia, on the other hand, we have surfaces that have been exposed to weathering for 300 million years. They are just mind-blowingly old. So following a long period of geological stability since the Permian and a buffered climate since the Jurassic, our earliest plant lineages emerged in the Cretaceous 85 million years ago when Australia broke fully away from Gondwana. Climate oscillations for the last 65 million years caused this expansion and contraction of plant ranges and this explosion in plant diversity, which has resulted in the biodiversity that we see today. So this map on the right shows the region, which contains 8,000 native plant species, 49% of which are endemic, in an area of 300,000 square kilometres. This incredible plant diversity is why this area is a global biodiversity hotspot. The red areas on the map are the hotspots within the hotspots. They're areas of high endemism on old landscapes, long lineage taxa, and the most diverse. So humans arrived to this landscape at least 47,000 years ago, if not much longer. And so on this evolutionary and geological time frame, this is right at the end of this scale. However, Noongar occupation of southwestern Australia represents one of the oldest enduring examples of sustained human ecological influence that exists anywhere. So this study that we carried out was in the southern coastal part of Noongar country. Noongar elders and botanists visited a young landform, Peenyup Creek, on the Bush Heritage's Baringa property, and an old landform just above a granite outcrop. You can see those in the photos there. At each of the sites we identified cultural plants and we discussed reasons to come to the site. For example, would you camp there, or would you hunt there, would you gather plants there? All of these reasons were collated and analysed using a multivariate approach. And then we tested this hypothesis, tested the model across two larger geographic areas to the west and to the east. The blue dots on the map show sites to which elders referred to in our conversations. So there were three key assumptions of the study. Firstly, that the highest level of human disturbance occurred where people spent most of their time, i.e. where they camped, where they hunted, burned vegetation, and along travel routes. The second assumption was that places that were considered important were revered and protected. And thirdly, that more plant knowledge remains of areas where people spent most of their time. And now I'm going to save the results and let Auntie Carol tell you a bit more about Noongar culture.
Okay, let's have a quick look at how we lived with the land, how we Noongar people lived with our land. In Noongar belief, we have 6 seasons that we live by. That is, every 2 months the seasons change. We look at the change of weather, the change in the plants, and then for changes in animals. This then influences all our behaviour. We Noongars as people are the last in these behavioural patterns. For example, when this little pink flower comes out, we know that it's Kambarung season, October, November, and we know it's time to gather the eggs of the malleefowl. Here is just a small example of our bush foods. This one is the york, and we dig up the tubers. This berry is the cheer, which is also my family totem. In Noongar belief, we have 2 totems, that of an animal and that of a plant, and we have great responsibility ensuring that these totem plants and fauna are protected. And we eat the seeds of this wattle, and where it grows now tells us where our old people used to camp, as they carried the seed for their food sources. In caring for the land, we also do fire stick burning or farming. We had a cultural obligation to do the fire stick burning, and this was done on a 4-year cycle that ensured that one local patch of bushland always had new grass that attracted animals, and especially kangaroos, and provided sustainability of our foods. The benefits for three folds of this patchwork burning. Animal habitats were preserved and protected. No big hot fires to cause devastation in the destruction of seeds and soils, but ash added nutrients to the soil. New green growth in recently burnt areas attracted animals needing to feed and to have a safe exit or retreat pathways. This practice of fire stick farming over a vast range of environment adapted the fire regime to suit individual areas. We could also steer the fire in a pattern to suit our needs to trap animals, which became a mosaic pattern. This practice has been passed on through generations for over thousands of years, but sadly can no longer be practiced due to Western laws. As with the land, equally, water sources were places of significance. Here are 3 places of my family's traditional campsites where I recall camping as a child. The importance of water and the spiritual connection, along with respect, were treated with reverence, as we believed that powerful spirits lived and protected particular places. Flowing waters were actual living spiritual beings. When we throw sand into the water to talk to the spirits, we are paying respect, and we wait for the spiritual response before proceeding with any activity. Although we had access to many places on the land, there were places we could not go. This photo is in the Stirling Ranges, or a place where we call Bullimia, or place of many eyes. It's an example of a restricted area where only some people can go. This is another site that I recall as a child being told not to enter, as it was for men's business. Restriction to these sites were governed by traditional stories of breaches of protocol. Why, I wonder? Could these laws from our ancestors be for the conservation of fragile plants and places? Were our ancestors' ecological knowledge far beyond what we know today and what we are coming to terms with today?
So at Peenyup, the activities to which Auntie Carol has just referred to did differentiate according to landscape type. That is, the activities on young and old landscapes were 75% different to one another. More activities were mentioned at the young site than the old, and these were associated with higher disturbance. Wider testing showed that this model still held. There was a dissimilarity between activities in young and old landscapes. Other results were that old and young both were important to culture. Camping and burning were primarily carried out in young landscapes, while both landscapes were fair game for plant harvest, demonstrating the extraordinary plant diversity of southwestern Australia is well and truly reflected in Noongar culture. Just an extra explanation here on this important variable that you can see in the slide. And it occurred across both landscape types. So in this study, sites were considered important if they were part of a creation story, if they were known by their traditional name, or if they were considered to be particularly important to an elder's family. Old landscapes, for example mountain ranges or granite peaks, often featured in creation stories, whereas the importance of old family campsites and an association with water spirits featured in elders' comments on young landscapes. So we also looked at reasons for burning country, and this plot at the top shows the number of mentions of each reason for burning. Most of these reasons relate to young landscape activities. The graph below shows that more knowledge of plants, there was a greater knowledge of plants in young landscapes than in old landscapes, and this indicates that more time was spent in these areas. So to sum things up, Octal Theory tells us that young landscapes support more widespread plant taxa that regenerate readily following disturbances, while old landscapes support diverse communities of highly specialised flora in small populations that don't tolerate disturbance well. Noongar conservation regimes do align with Octal Theory. More frequent everyday activities were carried out in young landscapes, resulting in relatively high human disturbance in these areas. Old landscapes, on the other hand, were not day-to-day places, but for special purposes, for only certain people in restricted areas, and thus relative human disturbance was low. So, in southwest Australia, contemporary conservation biologists such as myself are only just beginning on this path of collaboration with our First People, but this study shows us that collaboration is absolutely a critical path, and we must listen to our elders. Noongar ecological knowledge that's been developed among our old landscapes and refined by thousands of generations of Noongar people is fundamental to conserving exceptional biodiversity. And here's Auntie Carol for the final word.
So we have the question, were Aboriginal or traditional stories consistent with the scientific outcomes that we have today? We still need to look at these old stories. Were they really about protecting the land? Were they about listening to the whispers in the wind of how the old people cared for the land and the breaches of those protocols? So thank you for this opportunity to share our story, our people's story.